Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome to Spirit of Islam. I'm your host, Ashraf Zaghloul, and today, inshallah, we'll have a discussion with Sister Rabia Khidr, the Executive Director of the Canadian Association of Muslims with Disabilities. Assalamu alaikum, Rabia.
Wa alaikum salam.
Rabia, tell us about the association and what you do.
Well, Canadian Association of Muslims with Disabilities, CAMD, is a federally incorporated not-for-profit organization founded, established, and operated by Muslims with disabilities. Our objective is to create an inclusive society where everybody belongs, with or without disabilities. And in order to do that, we've set out some goals that we're hoping to achieve in the next short term and long term.
Well, tell us about some of the services you provide, huh?
At this point, what we have been doing is some community-based research to validate the issues and to document the experiences of Muslims with disabilities when they are participating within the Muslim community at Muslim events, activities, programs, and services through the masajids and centers. And what we've been doing so far in terms of actual service is trying to organize support groups, particularly community support circles, as we've titled them, for families who have children, whether young or adult, with intellectual disabilities.
Okay, I guess, do you see that Muslims with disabilities have special needs more than other people with the same disabilities in the community?
People with disabilities overall experience barriers to participation in any society, and our society here is not immune to that. We do experience barriers in the dominant culture and society. However, what's unique is when you have when you belong to other groups in terms of faith, ethnic origin, and whatnot, you face barriers in the mainstream, in the dominant culture, but you also face barriers within the community. So it's sort of on two fronts. That's what's unique about the experiences of Muslims with disabilities particularly. So we face barriers within our own community, within our places of worship, and we face barriers, not just because we have a disability, but also because we are minorities ethnically or religiously in the mainstream.
Could you give us example of these barriers within the community?
Within the Muslim community?
Yeah.
Within the Muslim community, for example, some of the experiences that we documented were primarily focused on people's attitudes, that when somebody with a disability wanted to participate in a jama'ah for Salah on Fridays or during Ramadan, if they were using a mobility device, for example, a wheelchair, a walker, crutches, and particularly if they're walking on crutches and they cannot remove their shoes, they got attitude from people that they were najaza being in the mosque. In many ways. And also the other piece is many of our smaller masajids and some of our major masajids are not fully accessible for someone to get around if they can't do stairs and
So what are you doing to educate the community and resolve these issues?
Well, we've taken every and all opportunities to speak to the media within the community, to speak at events and conferences around the issues. We launched our report 2 years ago, and that's what we originally talked on your show about, was towards an inclusive Ummah, Muslims with Disabilities Speak Out. When we launched that in February of 2007, we made a broad-based presentation to the community leadership around the issues and arising recommendations, and we've been talking to a number of masajids to implement those recommendations.
And have you been successful? Do you see this recommendation being implemented?
We're working on it. It's work in progress. It will take time. We've, for example, done an accessibility audit recently for Masjid Toronto. On their request, they asked us to come in and give them our recommendations of how they could physically improve the masjid for people with disabilities through their pending renovations.
Yes. You mentioned that you're having a conference sometime in May. Could you tell us more about this conference and what you hope to achieve?
Absolutely. We are holding a symposium entitled Planning for the Future, Disability Rights and Responsibilities. This symposium is being held on Sunday, May the 24th. It's an all-day event. Registration begins at 9:30, and we're asking people to register in advance through our website.
Is this a free conference or paid for?
There is a nominal fee for members of our organization, for families and individuals with disabilities, simply to cover the basic cost of refreshments and food for the day.
Okay.
There is a fee for professionals to attend.
Yeah.
And we are also offering display tables to organizations that are providing services, disability-related services.
What do you hope to achieve with this conference?
Well, the symposium is going to examine provide actually an Islamic framework around disability. Sheikh Abdullah Idris Ali will be speaking at it, and so will Sister Shahina Siddiqui from the Islamic Social Services Association from Winnipeg.
Yeah.
They will give us a history and Islamic context and current day challenges of families. They will sort of lay out that framework. We will present some family stories through a brief video. We will also have a lawyer talk about the legal rights in terms of wills, trusts, and estate planning for the future.
Yeah.
We will have somebody talk about the financial context, which includes, the new registered disability savings plan, as well as other programs that are out there that people can access for supports and services, such as special services at home, such as the Passport Initiative and ODSP income supports. Essentially, our goal that day is to help families gain greater knowledge and information and ask questions, particularly families that are caring for individuals with intellectual disabilities. As the caregivers who are primarily parents, as the parents age or pass on, they need to be ensuring that the individual's rights are protected.
Okay. So you mentioned some of your target audience. Anybody else you're targeting for this conference?
We are targeting our families that have been participating in the family circle meetings that we have held at the Thotic Center, at the Newer Cultural Center, at the ISNA Canada Center in Mississauga, as well as, and that was about 45 families that we've been engaging through those meetings. We're targeting our membership base of all people with disabilities. We are also reaching out to mainstream service providers who are working with families and want to know more about the Islamic context, again, in order to better meet the needs of Muslim families, even through mainstream service delivery.
Are you working with Canadian government agencies or Ontario government agencies that work with people with disabilities to be able to educate them more on special needs for Muslims?
We are constantly talking about that through our other involvements with different organizations, as well as through CAMD. I do a lot of, as a professional outside of CAMD, I do a lot of training for organizations around cultural competency, cultural proficiency, diversity, whatever we want to call it. It goes through different flavors. And in that, we always end up talking about the unique barriers that people who come from different communities face, including the dimension of faith and, again, bringing my own lived experience as a Muslim with a disability.
So, how could the community at large help, or what?
What we need from the community is we need them to participate, to reach out to families who have family members with disabilities, encourage their participation, if they are professionals or leaders, whether formally or informally engaged, involved in broader community participation, we need them to help spread the word about this symposium. And really, let's work together, let's mobilize and create a collective vision for the future so that we really are prepared before we face a crisis.
One of the things you mentioned, the goal of the association is support group for families with, disabilities. And I could see this as an important issue. How could you help, or what are you providing to these people?
Well, what's been happening so far, and like I've said, we've had tremendous, participation from families, is the fact that families need to come together and feel that they're not alone. That Mr. and Mrs. Alif aren't the only ones who have a child that's autistic, or Mrs. Ali isn't the only one who's a single parent of a son who has a severe Down syndrome. They need to come together and feel that they have a common experience. In fact, when we first held our meeting, I sort of got up that day and I said, today is going to be about the 4 C's. And I never communicated these 4 C's, but we had...
Well, I'd like to take this point after this break, so we'll go to a break and we'll discuss the 4 C's after.
Okay.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Spirit of Islam. We're talking about Muslims with disabilities. Sister Rabia, before the break you were talking about the 4 C's. What are the 4 C's?
Well, the 4 C's are essentially coming together for families to go through the stage of crying, complaining, clarifying their issues and challenges and dreams, and taking collective action. That was sort of our objective of initiating family meetings, after hearing some of the stories from families of their daily struggle.
Yes. So could you elaborate on each one and how they fit in and how do they help?
Well, parents often, when they have children with intellectual disabilities, feel very isolated. They feel they're alone. And when they come together and find that other people have similar issues, or as they view them, worse issues, it's a very emotional moment. And they get pretty emotional about it. And the first meeting, there were lots of tears. Then they started to complain. They felt safe, so they thought they can start complaining about some of their challenges in terms of, the community's attitude, the extended family's attitude, the society's attitudes, and the lack of support or services that they were receiving. After that, we took them on a journey to start talking through these meetings about what are the issues, what are the challenges, what are their dreams. So that's sort of the clarifying stage of let's get some common ground and clarity. And once that happens, let's start taking some sort of collective action so that we indeed have some idea of what we want in the future, and we're going to work together to achieve it.
Could you give us example of some of these collective actions? Because at the end of the day, this is the important part.
Well, what we need, what's missing right now, and one of the stories that I came across when somebody contacted me to participate in one of these forums, which, again, is something very personal to me, was a woman who has a brother. I also have a disability, but I have 2 brothers with intellectual disabilities. This woman had a brother. Her mother passed away. Her brother has an intellectual disability. She was she had some health issues herself. She couldn't care for him. She needed some help. So he was put in a group home. And in that group home, it was an environment that he didn't feel safe in. He wasn't familiar to. They didn't speak his language. and he was very upset, hurting himself physically. And it was an extremely traumatic experience for him and a traumatic experience for her. And, you know, so there's a common concern there. What happens when we or our, you know, primary caregivers, which are, you know, the mothers or the fathers, cannot physically care for their children? And mainstream services may not necessarily be that place that they're most comfortable with.